Start off this video, I'm going to give a personal anecdote. It's actually happened this afternoon, so well, it would be this evening actually. It's about 8 o'clock now, half eight, so it was about an hour ago. So this is a useful personal anecdote for the subject I want to talk about. Um, so I'll just prefix this by saying this is something that's very personal to me because I and my family a long time ago went through serious hassle with antisocial behaviour to the point where we had to move house. Now, for obvious reasons, I'm not going to go into extensive personal details on that, but it was a transformative experience in my life. It really, really shaped my views on crime and justice and made me conservative in that area. I don't call myself a conservative across the board, but when it comes to crime, I'm definitely hardline. I just don't think that there should be a situation where people can terrorize the public and it's somehow acceptable or it's just something that really, in a way, but before I get into the ideology side of it, what happened this evening, I was coming back from the cinema, watched Twisters, second time I've seen it, actually great movie, and that was the highlight of the day. It was a very good movie, I thought very worthy sequel. But this isn't a film review. So I was sort of talking to my friend about that. I'd watched the film with my friend. He was treating me for my birthday actually, and we were walking through Sunderland city centre, and a large group of young men slash teenagers, say, well, I say young men, the oldest might have been 19, 20, but average age probably 15, 16. I reckon about 12 of them, 12, 15. A few girls tagging along behind, but all dressed the same way, kind of in grey tracksuit type things, and the socks rolled up. This seems to be a curious thing I find with young offenders. They kind of roll their socks up into their trousers if it gets for a quick getaway from the police. And, I don't propose a Victorian mindset where you can kind of draw a criminal, but you just know by looking at them they're up to no good. And right enough, as me and my friend, we came across some other people we knew crossing into another street. An egg landed kind of in front of us, and they didn't directly say anything at that point, but it had to be aimed at my group. Didn't hit any of us. Few of them mouthing off something about the colour of my hair, of course, and I didn't say anything. But I kind of looked at them, and it started my mind started thinking, yeah, just careful. My friends were, you know, there was a lesbian couple and my gay friend. So whether they were targeted or something, I don't know. I didn't hear any homophobic abuse, but because of my previous experience, I kind of have an extra radar when it comes to that sort of stuff. I tend to be more focused on it because I just know where it leads to. Anyway, thankfully the situation didn't escalate. There was no confrontation. They went off somewhere. But it distracted me, and it just thought, no officers in sight, no police officers in sight, doing patrols. So you have this group of young guys basically thinking they own the streets, swaggering around, doing whatever the hell they want. It's disgusting. But I think it actually gets into a wider problem in this country. And I'm not going to say it's unique to Britain. Most countries have some sort of problem with youth crime, but there is something in this country, I do believe, that there is a complacency about it. Now, during the summer's riots, there were swift arrests, and a lot of them were, I think the youngest to be arrested was 11. And one of the stiffest sentences was 9 years for that guy who tried to burn down the hotel. Um, but there's actually a wider issue at stake here, which is a complacency towards justice. I made the video recently about the old gentleman who was killed in Leicester by children and young teenagers. And if that doesn't wake people up to the sort of thing that's going on in this country, I don't know what will. Um, now I'm a 39-year-old man. I could probably handle myself against one or two, possibly even three teenagers if I was prepared. But I'm average strength. The point I'm making here is not bravado. It's if I'm scared and if I'm vulnerable, what's it going to be like for an 82-year-old man, um, or another vulnerable person? It's scary. Um, but you see this. I read this week about a mother whose 12-year-old son was in court. I'm not sure if it was related to the riots. I think it might have been. She was on holiday in Ibiza. The courts fined her the equivalent cost of what her flight trip would have cost. I think that's far too lenient. I think they should have done that. Plus, I get why she wasn't sent to prison. There's the overcrowding issue. Then she's probably the sole guardian of the child. But definitely, I would have made it stiffer than that. I would have definitely had a very hefty community sentence and a mandatory course in parenting or something. It's just disgusting the lack of responsibility that's out there. But this can be exemplified not just in actual crime, but you see it in we have a problem with alcohol abuse in this country. Successive governments have cracked down on smoking, but we have a drinking problem in this country. How many crimes involve alcohol, violent crimes? More than a few. Um, if anyone's been on public transport, particularly around a football match, but not exclusively in that situation, you get a large group of drunk people on, they're shouting, they're throwing their weight around, not necessarily violent, but completely oblivious to the anxiety it causes fellow passengers. And I think there is an undercurrent in this country of, I call it a yob culture, and it disgusts me. It absolutely disgusts me. It may actually be the thing. There's a lot I like about this country. I'm patriotic, but it may be the thing I find most tasteless in Britain is this yob culture undercurrent. There's a lot of things I don't like. There's a lot of things I do like, but I think that's one thing I would highlight if someone says, "What do you not like in your country?" That is definitely something that's there because I mean, like I say, I could maybe defend myself against one or two people, but no matter how prepared I was, I couldn't defend myself against a group of 12 to 15 young men. I'd be killed. And in fact, there have been cases where men about my age have confronted teenage thugs and they've ended up literally dead. Because the teenage thugs have beaten them to death or stabbed them or something. Um, so you get this phenomenon where you get teenagers who just go around thinking they own the place, and it's not universally teenagers, but you see it starts at that sort of age and younger, and then it escalates, to the teenagers that are swaggering around city centres are just on an elevation path to becoming armed robbers, etc. Um, so actually, I do agree with intervention. Where I differ from the left is I don't think it should be softly, softly. I think it should be robust, hard line. And I've said this before, and I know it's a controversial proposition. I believe in some sort of scared straight approach. Now, I want to quantify this a bit because some people may look at what things I've said before, for example, about the Jeremy Kyle show, and they may say, well, wait a second, Nathan. Kyle brought on young offenders to a show. He exposed them and he berated them and so on. But the issue I had with that was not just all the exploitation that took place of vulnerable people, but the fact Kyle and his producers actually paid them to appear. So he portrayed this message that he was being tough on unlikable people, but he was actually bribing them to go on his show. I don't think young offenders or other criminals should be paid. And when I talk about the scared straight thing, I know it would be controversial. The liberal left will be up in arms about it, but we need to see what's happening here. Young offenders are not frightened of justice. They're just not scared. Now, maybe if you had a situation where, say, a 15-year-old, 14-year-old was brought to an adult prison for the day and forced to confront, obviously there'd be safety measures. You'd have bars there, you'd have officers in the vicinity, that sort of thing. But I honestly believe we may need to go down that path because softly approach just doesn't work. This idea, oh, they're young, we better not punish them too harshly. They laugh at that. They just laugh at that. Um, I'm not saying there's 100% guarantee that scared straight would work, but the thing is, with these dynamics, you get these youth gangs, and they're always in groups, right? So they need to be polarized. They need to be kept on their own. and then put them into a scared straight program, um, that might force reality into them. If you keep going down this path, you're going to end up in this scary place. Um, I know the Liberal left will be up in arms about it, but what they propose, which is, basically a softly approach, or we need to give them activities to do. We need to look at the root causes. Yeah, absolutely look at the root causes. But where I really part direction is this idea that because they're young, they should be treated with kid gloves. I think precisely because they are young, that is the point to intervene in a very hardline way. Otherwise, they get complacent. Otherwise, the 15-year-old mouthy young yob of today will graduate to be a 25-year-old armed robber. So, if you have early intervention and scare that 15-year-old as to what justice will involve, maybe they will think twice. Maybe not. It's not a guarantee, but it has to be better than what we've got at the moment, which is a situation of complacency. I think the Sentencing Council of England and Wales have said it many times, and their equivalent organisation in Scotland, the Sentencing Council of Scotland, are completely useless. I think they're absolutely tone deaf to public opinion. In fact, the Sentencing Council of Scotland explicitly states that people under the age of 24 shouldn't be explicitly punished because their brain isn't fully developed. Now, to me, that is grotesque. That is an insult to victims of crime. Um, and I know they'll get some sort of penalty, they'll get some sort of punishment, but it's the philosophy is what I'm referring to here. This current government, the prisons minister, Lord Timpson, is an unelected peer. He was the CEO of the Timpsons key making group in Manchester. Apparently, he's well known for having a sort of rehabilitation scheme where he gets ex offenders into jobs. Now, I'm not against that in principle. I accept that when people come out of prison, you can't just throw them out and expect the best. So I'm not against that in principle. But my issue with Timpson is his statement that we're far too fond of punishment in this country. Now, to me, that points to an ideology. What is that man thinking? It makes me wonder. And remember, he's now got responsibility for prisons. Um, if his philosophy lies with the idea that we punish we're too fond of punishment. That suggests very strongly he is, of the softly school of thought. We should just, well, we shouldn't punish them. We shouldn't focus on that. If someone hurts society, if they terrorize someone, they absolutely should be punished. Not only is that justice for the victim, but it is also fairness and it is also sending out the message as a criminal, no, you're not going to get a green light to do this. There is consequences. So I'd like to confront someone like Timpson and say, can you look at a victim of serious crime in the face, someone plagued by antisocial behaviour, and say, all the offenders shouldn't be punished? Because that seems to be his mindset. Now, he didn't say all criminals shouldn't be punished, but the very fact that he thinks too many are, to me, makes me wonder about his moral compass. Um, I don't think people should be in prison for not paying a TV license or for certain financial crimes, but crime against a person, absolutely. I think young thugs need to be. I think we need a harder line on them because how many more tragedies are we going to have where someone has spoken up to these um, gangs and they've paid a price for it, and it isn't even a case of people think they're doing the right thing because they see these teenagers vandalizing something. Sometimes they actually have to defend themselves. There's no choice. So it's not like some people might say it's practical to walk away, but sometimes there really is no other choice. Now, had that situation escalated, I would have physically had to defend myself and I would have done the best I could. But, you know, I'm with a vulnerable friend. He certainly couldn't defend himself. I mean, it scares me. It angers me, but it also scares me that we have a situation in Britain in 2024 where kids are making adults scared. That's an abhorrent situation. An abhorrent situation. And it's not entirely new. It's been a problem in this country for a long time. But in the past, you had youth gangs, right? Even in the Victorian period, There was a slum in London called the Old Nickel, and there were some awful crimes that took place there. So I'm not suggesting that violent crime is a new thing. I'm not even suggesting that youth crime is a new thing. But I do think there is a difference whereby, at least in the past, there was a certain fear of justice. There was a fear of the gallows. There was a fear of justice. Now, I'm not proposing we bring back the death penalty. That's not my position. But I'm just pointing out that the dynamic has changed. Where in the past criminals were as bad as they ever were, but at least they had some fear of justice. Today, there is no fear. And I think that has to be the starting point of looking at where we are at. Criminals do not fear justice. Now, the obvious answer there is justice needs to be tougher. If the attitude is, oh well, we better get softer, we better just put them on more community programs. It's you can see this pattern. I don't dismiss the background causes because if you have, for example, a heroin addict mother and a father who's in prison for armed robbery, clearly their offspring isn't going to have a good start, right? I get that. But there is nothing but nothing more important than protecting the public. And at the moment, the public are vulnerable because you have young offenders running wild in this country. And it's not necessarily that violent crime rates are out of control, it's that there's a complacency there. We have a shortage of police. So I think I'd like to see in this government a lot more police patrolling the streets. It's not 100% guarantee that that will deter crime, but even remorseless jobs don't want the hassle of dealing with the police. They may not be scared of them, they still would rather not deal with them, right? So at least that may be some form of deterrent. So we need more police patrolling the streets and not powerless community support officers. We need bobbies on the beat. So we need to be employing a lot more police. I think we need much tougher penalties for young offenders. I also think there need to be much harsher penalties for the parents. Now, I'm not saying in every single case it's the fault of the parents. I would suggest in many cases where you have an irresponsible parent, like that so called mother that went to FIFA while her 12-year-old was in court, people like that, I would absolutely throw the book at them because it's the rest of it's paying for their absolute irresponsibility. Um, but you have this situation where there is a complacency, and I think there is just it's a tragic situation that adults are scared of teenagers. And the signs of this is where they mouth off to strangers. There's no fear there. There's no sense of I don't know this person. They haven't done anything to me. I'm just going to mouth off to them because I can. Um, like I said, I'm not suggesting it's a totally new thing, but I am convinced that the approach that's been taken in recent decades, I wouldn't want to pinpoint a time, but perhaps the last 30 years, 30, 40 years, has been one of softly, softly. But we better not send them to prison. Let them shoplift, let them assault people, let them do all these things before we send them to prison. So it's chance after chance after chance. I would suggest something like if you have a young offender who's shoplifting, but they're not necessarily being violent, that is the point of intervention, robust intervention, not just, oh, we'll give them a warning and put them on a community sentence. It needs to be something tougher. If you get a young offender who's assaulting strangers or threatening strangers, absolutely juvenile detention automatically, because without it, they're walking the streets free to terrorize people. Um, there needs to be much harsher penalties than there currently are, not because it's populist or it sounds good, but because the public literally need to be protected. That's how I feel about it. If I had to defend a loved one, I would do it, but the dynamic there is I'd probably end up dead. And it's a very drastic way of talking, but there have been a lot of cases where men have stood up for their property, for their family, for another reason, and teenage killers have laid into them. It's terrifying, actually. I mean, it's a completely alien mindset to what um, to civilized behavior. And if it was just mouthing off, it's bad enough. But there is a component of violence there because if it escalated into verbal confrontation, these people wouldn't think twice about laying into someone. and it has happened. So that's a point. Reminder. I think someone like Lord Timpson, the prisons minister, needs to get himself into the real world and understand that the long-suffering public don't want a softly, softly approach. They want to see criminals held to account. The majority do. There will be some outliers. There'll be some people, including victims of crime, some victims of crime, who do favour a more lenient approach. I just think it's wrong. I think it, I think it enables criminals. I'll wrap this up, but there's just an undercurrent in this country of disrespect. And I've talked a lot about young offenders and teenagers, but there's 50-year-olds that have this attitude. It's just that the difference is with adults, they probably will get a harder sentence. But with young offenders, softly, softly, it's a complete and utter failure, and it shames successive governments. Neither Tory or Labour come out clean on this. Justice establishment is a disgrace. I think they need to get themselves into the real world and start listening to the public. I don't care that the Sentencing Council has public consultations, it's not enough. And they're clearly not acting enough on those public consultations. Um, I think they need to be a lot more visible. I think they need to justify themselves, and I think they need to start behaving more democratically, i.e., because they're all elected, I'd like to see them actually taking on board what the public want. The public do not want a softly, softly approach. I think these organisations, the Sentencing Council of England and Wales and the sister organisation in Scotland, are ideologically liberal left. I do believe that because that's the trajectory of their guidelines.